Why do Jesus' healings are about so much more than just feeling better? I'm Pastor Nate. This is another episode of the Sunday School Remix. Here we go.
Welcome to the Sunday School Remix, the show where we take Bible stories you learned as a kid and look at them with fresh eyes. Each week, we dig into the context and the overlooked details, and we often discover interpretations we never heard growing up. This isn't about winning arguments, but simply hearing God's living word speak to our lives again today. So grab your Bible and put aside your assumptions, and let's dive into another episode of the Sunday School Remix.
There's a lot of healing stories in the scriptures, but today I want to look at specifically the story of Jesus healing the Gerasene demoniac in Mark chapter 5. Because there's some pretty specific things that happen in this particular story that I think are also indicative of many of the other healing stories in scripture, but this one just has a lot of cool details. Here's how it starts off. Jesus sails across to the Gerasenes, and what this really is telling us is that Jesus is going to the other side of the tracks. Jesus is heading into Gentile territory, to a place that would be seen as unclean from Jewish eyes. But that's where Jesus is going directly. And as we'll hear, this is really a part of the mission that Jesus is constantly trying to move towards. It's never just for the Jewish towns and the Jewish people, but consistently throughout the scriptures, Jesus heads to Gentile territory and talks about the expanding of his message. And so this, in Mark's gospel, is the first time that Jesus goes to the other side of the tracks. So it's significant. And upon landing on shore, Jesus is greeted by a demon-possessed man. And we're told that this man has been living in the tombs and that he was chained to these caves where he was being held, but that the chains were broken because he was so strong and demon-possessed that he could break the chains. But just notice a few of these details right away. What this is telling us is that this man is ritually unclean again. He's living in the tombs, which has its own uncleanliness, at least from Jesus's mindset, one would think, certainly from a Jewish mindset. But it's also that he has a demon possessing him, another knock against him, making him further seen as unclean. And we're also getting a sense of how the town understood this man. They saw him as good as dead. He was so demon-possessed that they kicked him out of the town and made him go up and live in the tombs. And not only that, but they tried to manage him. They tried to chain him there because they wanted him away from the rest of their good, safe little town. So this man is not only experiencing incredible physical pain, this demon possession that he's living with, but he is also completely cut off from society. He's not allowed to be there. They see him as good as dead. They wished he was dead. They wished that this little problem in their town would just go away and stay there. But the breaking of his chains, that little detail in the scriptures, also tells us that as much as they're trying to manage this problem, they're really not able to. And so this demon-possessed man confronts Jesus right away. And it's not the man who speaks, but it's the demons inside him that notice that Jesus has arrived, and they notice that this is an individual who is so much more than just a person. Like, what do you want to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? You need to leave this place. Jesus has a discussion with the demons, which is in its own way such an interesting point, is that Jesus sees the sickness that's within the man. He doesn't equate the man with the sickness. That's what the townspeople have done. They saw him as nothing more than a demon-possessed man doomed to a life of failure. They cast him out. But Jesus doesn't equate the man with the disease. And so Jesus speaks to the sickness inside the man. That's who he talks to. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of the compassion that Jesus possesses and that he shows consistently throughout all of his miracle healings that he does. He seems to always understand that the person is so much more than the illness that is defining them at that time. There will be blind men who come along. There will be people who can't walk. There will be lepers. All of these people are initially defined by their illness. And Jesus sees them as a person and listens to them. Even though they've been cast out by society, Jesus is willing to come near and to see them as a person. And of course, this tracks with so much more of what we know and see about Jesus, in that he just doesn't get caught up in the labels. He'll go and talk with the woman at the well, who is a Samaritan and who has had 5 husbands and who has all of these reasons why she shouldn't be talking to the Jewish rabbi. But Jesus doesn't see her for her labels. He sees her as a person and speaks with her. Similarly here, Jesus is confronting the sickness first. And what we learn in this conversation with these demons is that they are many, and that their name is Legion. Now, what a particular and strange name. Legion was a Roman military term. A legion of Roman soldiers was about 5,000 soldiers. And a legion is what would be sent out in order to occupy a city. And so this man is experiencing a spiritual occupation. This is an element, we get that term spiritual warfare. And I have a lot of thoughts about that term, but more to the point, that this is what this man is experiencing. He's in the midst of an incredible occupation of evil within him. And what Jesus does, and here's where it really brings in some significance, is it sort of like barters with the spirits. It's like, hey, where do you want to go? It's like, okay, send us into those pigs. And just like, fine, all right. Jesus allows them. The spirits want to be cast into the pigs. And Jesus says, okay. And it even says in the text, Jesus allows them to do this. Such a strange little detail. But then look what happens. What Jesus allows is for those demons to enter those pigs. About 2,000 pigs, we're told. And then those pigs rush off a cliff and are drowned in the sea. It specifically says that they're drowned. And what this is it's a mini Exodus story. The legions of Pharaoh's army were chasing down the Israelites. And the Israelites were allowed to cross the Red Sea. They were provided a way by God through Moses. And then once they had reached the other side, the legions of Pharaoh's armies were only halfway through the sea when the waves dispersed and the armies were drowned. And so here, Jesus, in performing this healing miracle, is trying to help the people see. And the readers of this story would start to understand it as a mini Exodus. What God has done before, God is doing again. Jesus is coming to set us free, to lead us out of our suffering and to the promised land, to lead us out of slavery and into freedom. That's certainly what he does for this man, this demon-possessed man who couldn't even be contained by the chains, but was nonetheless as good as dead, cast off by society. Now he's healed. And what we read is that he's sitting there in his right mind. He's no longer screaming or cutting himself with rocks, as we hear in the beginning of passage. No. He has been restored. And notice that this healing isn't just a physical restoration. This is also a social restoration. No longer will he have to be cast aside by the rest of society. No longer will he have to live in the tombs as good as dead. He can rejoin the common community. And so many of Jesus' healing miracles are about this as well. Not just the way that Jesus saves us from a physical ailment, but also the way that Jesus saves and restores the individuals to community. Saves them from the shame that they've experienced. And so all of these little healing miracles, we always think of them, I think, and are taught to think of them in Sunday school as just these magic tricks. Like, look what Jesus can do. We talked about this with the water into wine story that we did on this podcast in the past. But no, it's so much deeper than that. It's also pointing us towards the ultimate work that Jesus will do, which is saving us from sin and shame and death. The miracles are a foretaste of the feast to come. And they point us to this type of communal restoration that has always been at the heart of Jesus's ministry and mission. And that's what happens to the man. He is restored. And most interestingly, in verse 15 of chapter 5, Mark 5:15, we're told that the pig herders went to the town to say, like, hey, like all our pigs were killed. And so then people are coming out, and when they find the man in his right mind, we're told that they are afraid. They're afraid of the man now restored. They weren't afraid earlier when he was yelling and screaming and cutting himself with rocks. They weren't afraid when he was demon-possessed. No, but now they're afraid that he's been restored. Because maybe they're starting to realize that this whole careful system that they've constructed is falling apart. That Jesus is subverting and calling out their corrupt hearts, their corrupt actions that just wanted to push a human being aside and see him as nothing more than his disease. This is part of what Jesus is forcing them to reflect on. And what's even more interesting is that they ask Jesus to leave. They don't like what they're seeing. They don't like what it means for their little community. They're afraid of how this could change everything. And in particular, I think it's so fascinating that there's an economic element to this. Because those herds of pigs were someone's livelihood. The loss of 2,000 pigs would be substantial and difficult. And yet, what the story is forcing us to reflect on is that these people care more about their economic livelihood than they do about caring for this hurting man. They care more about their economic livelihood than the fact that this person's life has been saved and restored. And it forces us to confront those types of feelings within ourselves too. Are we often more concerned with our own comfort than we are with the care of other people? Do we wish that the problems that unsettle us would just go away and we could just force them off into the caves to be chained up somewhere else where we don't have to deal with it? Or can we see people for more than just their disease? Don't we do this all the time where we attach a label to a person, and then by attaching that label, it allows us to push them to the side and disregard them? I think this healing story is about Jesus trying to help us, the readers, confront that part of ourself as well, to deal with the fact that sometimes problems are messy and we can't just be constantly labeling them and casting them aside. But sometimes we need to come near. What's really neat is about how this story concludes, because the man, now in his right mind, does come to Jesus and wants to follow. And everything in this story seems to be set up that this will be another one of Jesus's disciples. To this point in Mark's gospel, Jesus has done a lot of work calling disciples. And so it seems like the man is now going to be the next one in the group, but instead Jesus says, no, you need to stay here. Because Jesus needed a disciple for all the world. Jesus needed a disciple in the Gentile territory. And so we're told that the man goes to the Decapolis. And why that is so significant is because we'll learn later in Mark's gospel that this man was successful in sharing the message. In Mark chapter 7 and 8, Jesus will feed 4,000 people at the Decapolis. A group of 4,000, not including women and children, has come and followed him to that place because they've heard about this great man who restores the demon-possessed, who calls out the poor treatment of others. And so a group of 4,000 shows up at that space. So we can see and connect the dots to know that this man was good on his word and had such an incredible story to tell and to share that it spread to others who wanted to hear and see and experience the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. So there's so much within this story for us to think about. And as I said in the beginning, I think it really frames so many of the healing stories. This is the way that Jesus works, and this is so much a part of his whole ministry. And it ultimately resolves with his final act of death and resurrection, which is the story of Jesus trying to restore everyone, the entire world, not just the Jewish area, but the Gentile area as well. The entire world being reconciled back to God, so community can be reformed, and so that we'll hopefully be healed of our constant need to label and disregard and push aside, but instead be brought as one into a greater whole under Christ's banner of love. So there you go. That's a lot of details in a little story, and it really gives you the chance to look at a whole bunch of healing stories. But I hope you see why I chose this one in particular, because there's just a lot of awesome details for us to consider, and the ways that this is the work God's always been doing, right? That whole mini Exodus element really kind of tries to tell us that God's constantly been in the business of freeing and liberating people who are ashamed or in pain or suffering. And that work continues through Jesus' healings and ultimately through Jesus' death and resurrection. I hope you enjoyed this. Share it with family and friends. Hope it leads to good discussions about different ways that we're seeing this play out in our lives and in our world. I'm Pastor Nate, and this has been another episode of the Sunday School Remix. And remember, friends, the story didn't end in Sunday school.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Sunday School Remix.